Hello and welcome to another edition of History Science Fiber. My name is Zoe McDonald, I'm a biologist, and today we are under these beautiful oak trees to harvest some acorns. I get a lot of questions about dyeing with these, so let's get started. These acorns come from English oaks, also known as common or European oaks. They are a flowering deciduous plant native to most of Europe. The leaves are lobed with short stalks, also known as sessile. They flower in the spring, and the fruits, also called acorns, mature in the autumn around September to October. The species is generally considered naturalized and not invasive. All right, so at the end of the day, I collected about 5 pounds worth, which is good for my uses. And as you can see, they're not all pretty. So then have some squirrel harvesting. All right, so we are ready for step 1, which is we are going to be weighing the acorns and then soaking them for about 3 days. The nice thing with the acorns is you don't actually have to process them in any way. You don't have to crack them open. You pretty much just use them as they are. If you'll notice, they have gone from a bright green, to more of a brown. You can dye with both. You can dye with them right away as green. They're just gonna go brown and gray in the bath as you soak them. But here we go. So what we're first gonna do is I'm gonna weigh them so that I know how much I'm starting with as a ratio to my fiber. Once I've weighed them, I'm gonna add them to my pot, which I will get in just a second. And then I'll show you a special bag that we add that is gonna really help as a really easy step to setting up the dye pot. So one sec. So here's our dye pot. This is a 12-liter dye pot, which is about a 3 gallon, there we go, 3 gallon pot. And the one thing that I always add that I really like, and I picked this up from a natural dyer in Washington State named Alyssa Allen, I just think it's a great step, is you add what's called a paint bag. These are available at the paint shop, really inexpensive, and I reuse them. And by adding them in first, and then you add your dye material, you're gonna soak, then we're gonna heat at the end, and then we can just pull the whole thing out, and our dye vat is ready to go for our dyeing without any extra decanting or pouring or anything like that. It's just a really easy way to skip a step later on. Okay, so now that we have all our acorns, we've added in our bag, we have our acorns, we're gonna add our water, and we're just gonna leave it to soak. And a lot of plant dyes really benefit from a good soak before heating. It just seems to allow some of that waxy coating and the defenses to really break down and allow that dye to come and be released. So let's add the water. And I'm just adding room temperature water. Doesn't have to be hot. And then I'm gonna leave it covered, probably on the stove, for 3 days. And then we will heat and we'll be ready with our dyes. So I fill it probably about 2/3 full. And then we're just gonna leave it. As you can see, they're all floating at the surface. And there's, I mean, people ask about the caps. You can leave the caps in. It doesn't seem to make much of a difference. And I've also have ones in here that have been cracked or eaten by rodents partially, and all of that is fine. We're not eating this, and none of the equipment that we're using today is for eating. We always want to use separate equipment for dyeing just because then we don't have to worry about food safety. All right, so now we're gonna put it on the back and leave it for about 3 days. And let's see what they look like at the end. I know I said I wouldn't heat it, but I kind of decided that I would put it on a low heat every once in a while when I'm in the kitchen. See what it does. So it's been about 12 hours, and you can see they're starting to sink, and you're starting to get kind of a coppery brown color in the water. But that's what you're looking for as they sink down, get waterlogged. Yes, nice dye this would make it. All right, day 2. It's looking good. I can see that we're starting to get a lot more sunk down. and that water's going brown. Okay, so it's now day 4. We can now have a look. Most of the acorns have dropped down, and I can see that the color of the dye pot has gone kind of a dark brown. So here is where using that paint bag really comes in handy, because I can just lift all the acorns out now, put them in a little thing here, put them here. And now the pot is absolutely ready to go. I can put my yarn in and I don't have to worry about any of the fiber getting tangled up with any plant bit. Okay, so I want to talk about mordanting for a second. It's a step you need to do in natural dyeing that you don't need to do for acid or modern dyeing. But it does open up a lot of possibilities for getting multiple colors from the same pot in a way that you can't do with modern dyes. But it is an extra step in the process, and it is kind of a pain, but I wanted to introduce it to you now. If you know all about mordanting, you can kind of skip ahead. But, so here's what I do. So most of my dye videos, I actually use this wool, ecological wool. I love it. I pick it up at a local yarn shop that actually gives me a discount, which is very nice of them for videos and for the dye workshops that I run locally. And so I buy this in bulk, and I know that this weighs 250 grams. And when you're mordanting, is about introducing tannins or a metal salt like aluminum potassium aluminum sulfate or ferrous sulfate. So what that means is I'm going to heat up my wool for an hour with a dissolved salt that also has metal. And the metal is going to be absorbed into the wool and allows that wool to pick up not just additional color or intensify the color, but actually change the colors that are picked up. It's a great way to add a lot of color and pop to your yarn. I'm going to cover wools or animal fiber, but you can also need to mordant plant fibers. And there's lots of different ways to do plant fibers, like cottons and linens. People do soy milk. People do aluminum acetate, which is a slightly different metal salt. But for now, I'm going to do wool for this video. And so alum, I'll show you what it looks like. That's what alum, Casey, alum looks like. It's just a white powder. It's inert. It's fairly non-toxic. But for all of this step, when you're mordanting, you do want to turn on your fume hood and make sure things are well ventilated. So the portion that you use is about 15 to 16%. So what that means is the weight of your fiber, you're going to take 15 to 16% of that as the weight of your aluminum sulfate or of your mordant. So you're going to measure that out. You are going to dissolve it. I usually dissolve it in a jar with some water, and then I pour it in. I'm going to add my yarn, and then I'm going to heat it for an hour. And then that allows the yarn to absorb alum. And alum tends to allow the yarn to take up the color of the vat itself. So if you're dyeing with something pink, alum allows more pink to be taken up, which is different than ferrous sulfate or an iron mordant. I'll show you what the iron mordant looks like. It's more of a kind of a muddy green. For this, iron is very hard on wool and hard on fibers. So while alum you would use 15 to 16%, for ferrous sulfate you're actually going to use 6%. It's like the absolute minimum you can use for that hour of heating. So use the same process, which is you're going to weigh your dry fiber. You're going to you're going to weigh out 6%. You're going to dissolve it in a jar, add it to water, add your fiber, which should be pre-wetted. And then you're going to heat that for an hour, and then you're going to give it a really good rinse. And what ends up happening is yarn that's been introduced to iron, your ferrous sulfate, will go this color. It's almost like a golden brown. And so these are all skeins that I have made up out of iron. And then what you'll find with iron is it goes a much, much darker color, and we'll see that today. And then the other ones is this is the alum. So alum doesn't actually change the color. So you have to make sure that it's labeled. Another thing you can do is do a color of zip ties. So you can get colored zip ties and zip tie each one of these, and that indicates that it's alum, just in case you're doing a pot of non-mordanted alum. For example, this this little skein here is non-mordanted. This is just the wool straight from the skein. And I put a zip tie because once these are in the pot together and dyed, it's gonna be really hard to tell the difference. But if you can use a zip tie that's nice and loose, it's not gonna affect the dye uptake. You're gonna be able to tell exactly how adding that alum changed the color. And now we're gonna go on to step 2. So in this video, we're going to be dyeing with Acorns. It is now day 4. And so I'm gonna dye with some different skeins. Acorns have a lot of tannins, and this skein here with the blue is not gonna be mordanted at all. And you're gonna see when we dye, it's gonna have very little difference between this one, and we're gonna use, let's say 2 of the alum. We're gonna put those in. Now I'm not gonna, as you can see, these ones don't have a zip tie, but because my non-mordanted one does have a zip tie, I'm not super worried about it. So we'll do 1, 2, and then the last one we're gonna do is iron. And I'll show you why we're gonna do multiple skeins of that in a second. And so we're gonna use 1, here's the iron mordanted, and as you can see, it's already starting a different color, but as we dye, you'll see it'll go much, much darker color. That's what iron does. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is go to the sink and get these soaking and soak them for about 20 minutes to half an hour, because when we put our wool into our pot for dyeing, we want it to soak right in. And if it's not dry, it'll kind of sit on the surface. You're pushing it down. But if you can pre-soak it in water, and then the other thing I do is I tend to soak these separately, because iron can contaminate other wools, and you'll get dark splotches. So even just for soaking, I'll keep them separately, but by the time they're done soaking, they're usually pretty good. And then I'll put them all in the dye pot together, and then there isn't any contamination. Let's do it. All right, so we have our 2 jars. And as I said, I'll do the iron one separately, and I usually just do room temperature. Yep. And then sometimes I'll even just sort of pull out the bubbles. So I'm going to leave those for about 20 to 30 minutes and allow the wool to start sinking down in, and that will allow us to get better results than if we had just put in pure dry wool. The pot is just room temperature, just as it's been left. So now over here, if you can see, I've got my wool in the jar, and we're just gonna add them. So this was the iron mordanted, we're gonna put this in, and I'm just taking room temperature wool to room temperature, and I'm gonna heat the pot while the yarn is in there. You wanna take care of your fiber temperature wise. I think of them as sort of temperature bridges. You want to keep them at the same temperature. You don't want to take, room temperature yarn and add it to, a rolling boil kind of thing. And the reason you want to do that is it keeps the luster of the wool when you look after the temperature, and you heat things slowly and cool it slowly. And it should also stop it from felting. So now that all of the wool is in, we are going to turn it on, and then I'm going to heat it for about an hour, and you'll see I'll sort of give it a gentle stir about every 10 minutes or so. Let's see what happens after about an hour. The last thing to be careful of is you do not want it to boil. Boiling can destroy dyes and destroy the molecular structure of the dye molecules, which will not allow you to take up the color that you want. So we only ever want to go to a simmer, usually about sort of 70 to 80 degrees. So there's a little bit of movement, but it's not at a rolling boil. And it's different for different dyes, but certainly for this one, you do not want it to boil. So I'm just going to put it on medium heat. And I tend to leave the lid off so it doesn't do a quick boil. Let's see how that goes.
One question you might have is how much acorns are you going to need for your project? And I've dyed with them enough to be able to say roughly 1 cup of acorns for every 10 grams or half an ounce of fiber. That should help you get started. But really, if you collect a whole bunch of acorns, enough to fill your dye pot, a third or a quarter full, that should be plenty for your project.
So you can see that that iron is already starting to darken. So we'll get it a little bit hotter and then we'll keep it there for an hour. So how's our pot doing? It's about the halfway mark. The alum mordanted and the non-alum one is about the same. So you can see that this has tannins that are adding a little bit of color but not much. And then the iron is a beautiful chocolate brown. That's just a great color there. So we'll wait the full hour and then pull them out. Here's the skein that had no mordant, and here's the one that had the iron mordant, and it's a beautiful chocolate brown. Now, if these were larger, or I was doing this for a specific project, I might leave them in longer to really cool down, but I'm not super worried about that with these sample size skeins. All right, I'm gonna show you an extra little trick to getting more colors out of your dye pot without a lot more work, and that's called a post-dye dip. Some people call it a bloom, and then other people disagree and call a bloom something else with dyeing, but you're safe if you call it a post-dye dip. And that's to create a solution of ferrous sulfate. So that's the same mordant that we used to create the iron wool, but this time, instead of introducing it before the dye, we're gonna introduce it after. So we'll create a solution. So we're gonna take some of the water that's in the dye pot, so it'll be the same temperature as the wool that's in there. We're going to dissolve a certain amount of ferrous sulfate into here. It's important that we still keep the same ratio, which is 6%, because if you add more concentrated iron, your wool is gonna get really friable. It's really chews it up. So you just gotta be a little bit careful. What I'm gonna do here is I've measured out 2 grams, which is the right for 2 skeins. 2 grams is 6%. So we're gonna add that. And then we're just gonna allow that to set. And then once our pot is done for the hour, we're gonna create some liquid in here. The same liquid, we're gonna pour some in, 2 skeins, and like I said, take some out, and you're gonna see some different colors. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take some of this. This is what we're gonna do for our post-dye dip. And this is the jar that has the iron mordant that we've already added. So once we have enough in here, I will transfer the yarn over and we'll do 2 skeins. And because of the extra iron in here, it's gonna really darken that sort of tanny yellow color. And I like to use this because I know this is exactly the same temperature as the yarn inside. So it's not going to shock the wool. So I'm going to give this iron a bit of a stir. And we're going to add 2 skeins of alum mordanted yarn and see, pull them out at different times. And we're going to see 2 different colors. Here we go. One goes in. Already see it's turning darker color. Let's see what we get. It's been in for about a minute. You can already see it darkening. Okay, it's been about 5 minutes in our post-dye dip. And let's see, we've got 2 skeins. Let's pull the first one out. This is how it looks at the 5-minute mark. It's kind of a charcoal brown. It's kind of an interesting color. Okay, so we'll let that cool a little bit and then give it a rinse. And we'll leave this other one in for a little longer and see if we can get a slightly darker color. Okay, for our last one, let's have a look. It's been an extra 10 minutes. I don't want to leave it in too long, the iron. Let's see what color that comes out to as well.
And here are the results. We got 4 distinct colors, a beautiful yellow, a chocolate brown, a light gray, and a deep medium gray. Super happy.
So if you're curious about how the acorns turned out, they're now very brown and very smooth and shiny. So they have had a bit of a color shift, and they're all sort of very uniformly brown. So there you go. And now these can go straight into the compost.